Hello and welcome to the Spike podcast. I'm Fraser Myers. With me this week, back in the studio as ever, we have Spike's editor, Tom Slater.
Hello.
Delighted to be joined by Spike contributor, Candice Holdsworth.
Hello.
Loads to talk about today. We'll be discussing the political earthquake in Germany, how TERF Island resisted America's woke imperialism, and the thoughtpolice visiting a pensioner who criticised a Labour councillor. Before we get into all that, Tom, do you want to remind everyone that it's Spike's 25th birthday?
Yes, I'd like to, of course, let's remind everyone that Spiked is celebrating our 25th anniversary at the moment. I want to say a huge thank you to everyone who's already given to our donation drive to celebrate this huge milestone. We really can't thank you enough. To those who might not have heard about it, we are running this special offer on at the moment to celebrate this birthday, to celebrate this milestone. So if you donate £25 or more, you can get a whole year's membership to Spike Supporters. That's our online donor community where you can read the site free of ads, comment on the articles, come to exclusive events, that kind of thing. It's usually £50 for the year, so you're getting it at half the usual price. And also, if you're already a Spike supporter, but you want to benefit from this offer, why wouldn't you? If you go and donate now for the anniversary, for the donation drive, we'll extend your membership by a year as well. So that's spiked-online.com/donate. Please help us celebrate.
So, at the weekend, Germany's elections delivered a bloodbath for all of the governing parties. The Social Democrats, Olaf Scholz's SPD, scored their worst results since 1887. The Liberal FDP, also in the coalition until last year, are out of parliament. The Greens, their leader, Robert Habeck, has resigned after coming a humiliating fourth. Tom, the Conservatives came on top, but even they actually scored a pretty hollow victory. The real story here is that everyone's talking about is the rise of the AFT, the Alternative for Germany.
No, absolutely. I mean, they got a record-breaking result for them, almost 21% of the vote. They're now the second largest party in Germany. And I can't imagine that many people didn't see this coming. I mean, not only has there been steadily rising support for this right-wing populist party within Germany, but also this election campaign happened against the backdrop of one attack after another committed by a mixture of asylum seekers, Islamists, a bit of both. Some of them clearly terroristic motivations, some of them just violent, disturbed people who, for whatever reason, weren't removed from the country. And that really became the clear theme of the election, that you had an establishment party, an establishment coalition, which had very late in the day started to respond to some of these concerns about asylum, security, terrorism, and so on, but not really doing very much. You had, of course, the CDU coming back, bouncing back as a consequence of the failings of this government, but not really kind of properly kind of capturing the energy, making the right noises on some of these issues as far as voters was concerned. And of course, you had the AFD, who have essentially become the outlet for a significant proportion of German society, particularly working class voters, for people to express their anger that these issues aren't being addressed. I think, particularly from outside the UK, it's easy to have missed just what's been going on in Germany in terms of the scale of the attacks and things that we've seen. But, the Friday before the election, there was a knife attack in Berlin at the Holocaust Memorial, which is believed to be Islamist motivated. The target seemed to be Jews, even though it was a Spanish tourist who was stabbed as it happened. Before that, there was the Munich car attack just a couple of weeks ago by an Afghan asylum seeker believed to also had an Islamist motivation. There was a stabbing in Aschaffenburg earlier this year by a disturbed Afghan asylum seeker who was slated for deportation but was still in the country at the time, in which he lunged at some school children, or some preschool children, in fact, with a knife. There was the Magdeburg attack, a bit of an unusual one there, as far as it was a kind of anti-Islam Saudi refugee, but nevertheless a lot of questions about security. And then there was Zorlingen, there was Mannheim. All of these stories might have kind of come and gone in our news feeds, but they continue to trouble the German public. And that's even without talking about the huge number of foiled attacks which have taken place in Germany, particularly post-October the 7th. Hamas-linked attacks, ISIS-linked attacks, plans on Christmas markets, the Israeli embassy, you name it. Is anyone really surprised that in that context, a party which is very much campaigning on these issues is going to have a record-breaking result, particularly in the context of an establishment which has either failed to address these problems, or of course their fingerprints are all over why these problems have come to pass to begin with?
Definitely. And Candice, I mean, the response to the AFD from the establishment parties has been to essentially demonise it. That's a familiar theme. There are many dodgy people in the AFD, of course. We shouldn't deny that or downplay that. But clearly the campaign of simply calling it far right, calling its voters far right, calling for it to be banned, calling for it to be excluded from mainstream politics has failed quite spectacularly.
It has. I think what we're seeing now is people trying to change the system. And that's what a democratic system is for. It's so that you can shift, so that when voters want change in the system, they can vote for people who can respond to them. And I think for so long, what the elites have done is, like you said, they've sort of tried to toxify those alternatives, so invalidate what people want. So when people are bringing up these concerns, saying, hey, there's real problems with the type of immigration we've had. There are security concerns. They also want to have deeper discussions about maybe culture and values and belonging, whereas I think many in the liberal elites just want to sort of keep it in the economic realm. And that is a big part. That's a big dimension of how people live their lives, but not solely. And I think what's happened to the left and the center left is, I think slowly their worldview is becoming less legitimate, and people listen to it less and less. And so what we're seeing all over the world, there's this huge pattern now of things shifting rightwards and people moving towards these populist parties. And even though each country is different and the discussion takes a different shape depending on what country you're in, it all seems to be driven by the same things, this disillusionment with the way that immigration in particular is managed.
And one of the other major factors was, of course, the economy. The German economy, once thought to be dynamic, resilient, has been shattered over the past couple of years. We've seen 250,000 manufacturing jobs gone. Major industrial firms like VW closing down factories for the first time in their history. Tom, a major factor in this is the embrace of net zero. In fact, Germany's embrace of it has been particularly crazy because they've also shut down lots of nuclear power plants. There's a big warning there, isn't there, for other European countries, but we seem not to want to heed that warning.
No, absolutely. I mean, the penny's dropping, but far too late, I think, for a lot of politicians across Europe. You're absolutely right. I think Germany became the kind of test bed for some of the most poisonous failed elite orthodoxies of our time. There was the net zero ideology, the much vaunted energy transition, which has over such a short period of time has swiftly kind of almost deindustrialized what used to be the industrial powerhouse of the European Union. You combine that, of course, with the asylum and migration embrace, the 2015 Angela Merkel policy of welcoming, a million refugees to the nation within just 1 year. The famous slogan of Wir schaffen das, we will manage, as evidenced by these attacks and so on. Germany hasn't been managing particularly well at all. And I think you could, at the same time, want to be generous to people who are fleeing war and persecution, while also recognising that if you have a completely chaotic, completely unchecked system, that good people that bad people as well as good people are going to cross that border, that it's important to know who is in your country. And it's also important to be able to remove people once it's become clear that maybe they are here under false pretenses. Maybe they weren't fleeing war, they were fleeing murder charges in another country. And Germany's been hamstrung from doing that, either from a mix of human rights rules, political ineptitude, and also the nature of being within the Schengen area, within the European Union, in a very pro-EU state. It becomes very difficult to maintain borders in that kind of context. So you have kind of crashing together these two, in particular, kind of elite orthodoxies, which prove themselves to be such catastrophic failures. Ordinary people have been effectively made to pay the price for this sort of elite virtue signalling on the questions of asylum and energy in particular. And you combine that with the fact that the mainstream didn't want to touch these issues. Of course it's going to lead to a right-wing populist backlash. The AfD would be nowhere near where it is currently if people didn't feel like they weren't being reflected by other sections of politics. In some respects, I think it can be a little bit misleading to see it straightforwardly as a kind of shift towards the right. Insofar as it's, particularly on these issues, it's a shift towards where basically everyone was only a few decades ago. No one thought these kind of pie-in-the-sky utopian ideas around borders or around climate were a good idea relatively recently. It's just that the elites went crazy and ordinary people remain pretty commonsensical. They've had to resort to these, in some cases, quite extreme figures to make their presence felt. But the AfD wouldn't be the force that it is if it wasn't for the catastrophic failure of the elites. It really is that simple. So to respond to it, I mean, people can beat up on AfD figures all they want. If they could disagree with them, they don't have to go into power with them if they don't want to. But what they can't do is demonise those voters, those concerns, those things that brought them out to the ballot box. because those issues and those voters aren't going away. If anything, if you look at the turnout, etc., people have been energised by these issues, and they really want to make their point now more than previously, it seems like.
Yeah, definitely. Highest turnout since German reunification, essentially. So the idea that these parties are a threat to democracy seems a bit questionable. It's invigorated democracy, if anything.
It has, and I think people are more pragmatic. I mean, you know, that's it. There's a sort of like rigid adherence to things like net zero and green ideology. And, you know, I've noticed over the years just how much more zealous that movement has become and started making ever greater demands, which most, like you say, common sense, most people would not adhere to it. Like, for instance, not having children or not having a third child. I mean, I actually had a debate with someone about that having a third child is bad for the environment. And you can't believe you're having these sorts of discussions. But I think it's because it went unopposed for such a long time, and ordinary people weren't allowed to voice their opposition to it. And now they are. They've learned a lot about what these movements are and what they represent and what they're asking of ordinary people. And they're saying, no, actually enough. We're going to push back now.
Tom, obviously what happens next is the government, well, the CDU will try and form a coalition.
Mm-hmm.
And as you alluded to, you know, there is this famous firewall against the AfD. Parties just won't work with it. Now, obviously, every party is within their rights to work with whoever they like. But isn't there a danger that, you know, the result is potentially we're looking at a coalition where the government or the governing parties that have just been ousted are invited straight back into government? I mean, where's the change going to come from?
No, absolutely. If you think about the Social Democrats, you know, their worst result in their modern history are rewarded for that by a place in another kind of grand coalition. It's just going to look like a stitch up to so many people. The question is whether or not these parties in the mainstream have so had their heads knocked together by the revolt of this election, by the revolt of previous elections as well, that they now realise they have to deliver, that the SPD, for instance, cannot block the CDU in implementing, if it means what it says, more sensible sort of measures where border and asylum are concerned. But otherwise, they're signing their own death warrants. I mean, they're going to continue to kind of stoke up more resentment with the establishment. But as you say, this is going to look like, to a lot of people, it doesn't matter who you vote for, the elites always get in.
Yeah.
So interesting times ahead, certainly. But the revolt against this elite is certainly not going away, particularly if they choose to ignore it, as they so often do.
This episode is sponsored by Shopify. Now, starting your own business and becoming your own boss might sound like it's an impossible task, but it's actually far easier than you think. The way to make it simple, to turn your passion project into profit, is with something that sounds like this. That's the sound of another sale on Shopify, the global commerce platform that's helping millions of businesses launch and grow every day. Whether you're selling silk ties or homemade pies, Shopify makes it simple to build, scale, and succeed. Shopify takes care of all the hard stuff so you can focus on what really matters, your business. From marketing to payments to inventory management, Shopify's all-in-one platform streamlines every step. The best part is that Shopify grows with you. Whether you're selling your first product or shopping thousands of orders every day, it offers powerful analytics and AI-driven tools to help you optimize and expand. So you can spend less time on admin and more time doing what you love. And with Shopify's seamless integrations, you can sell everywhere, on social media, through your own website, even in person. Your central dashboard lets you manage everything from orders to shipping to customer insights, all from one place. So what are you waiting for? Sign up for a £1 per month trial period at shopify.co.uk/spiked. Go to shopify.co.uk/spiked to take your business to the next level today. That's shopify.co.uk/spiked. Donald Trump's freeze on foreign aid has had a really surprising effect on the UK. Stonewall, the LGBTQ charity, has announced that it might have to cut half of its jobs following Trump's announcement. We know that it got at least £500,000 via something called the Global Equality Fund, which is run by the US State Department. I mean, Candice, it seems quite extraordinary to learn that some of the battles we've been having over gender ideology might really have been about resisting American colonialism almost. What do you make of that?
Honestly, I mean, were they really being good custodians of American taxpayers' money by funding this type of thing? I mean, if you were to do a poll of most ordinary people, if they knew that's what their money was going towards, I think they'd be like, no, we don't want that. I mean, I know a lot of this money is signed off by the State Department in the US, but ordinary people would definitely protest this type of thing. I mean, this whole sort of opening up of what USAID has been funding is fascinating. I mean, there's things like overseas health programs, which I think most people would think, that's okay, that's fine. But it's the way they've given themselves the power to take money from people, which is literally hard-earned, and use it for various ideological causes all around the world as if they know better. And these are highly divisive issues. I mean, this was a highly divisive issue here. Stonewall is a very controversial organization. Even though they were adopted by various establishment figures, most of the ideas they were pushing had no popular support at all, here or in the US. So I think it's a really good thing now that finally we see maybe what was driving them all along, because it certainly wasn't any representation amongst the public.
Yeah, I mean, Stonewall, one of the former leaders famously said that compared basically being a lesbian to being a sexual racist. If you exclude trans women from your dating pool as a lesbian woman, then you're basically, you're basically recreating some sort of apartheid system in your life. I mean, what do you make of that, Tom?
And the idea that some trucker out in Ohio is funding this kind of activities is so absolutely absurd. It's a real reminder, all of this, about what a kind of racket, really, the whole international aid setup is. Of course, there's many good organisations, there's many very worthy causes, there's many things that richer nations would want to fund around the world in terms of infectious diseases, in terms of development, what have you. That's clearly not what this is. That's clearly not what a lot of the charities and initiatives that have been uncovered during this sort of bonfire of the USAID accounts that has been going on, whether it's transgender operas in Latin America or whatever else it might be. Can anyone genuinely say that what Stonewall has been doing has benefited LGBT or even T people in the UK or across the world because of their increasingly obnoxious, censorious, and on occasion quite damaging campaigning? I mean, is it genuinely the case that, for instance, Rory Stewart's wife, Shoshana Stewart's charity in Afghanistan, which had also lost a USAID grant, that it was money well spent, that it was famously kind of teaching Afghan women about Marcel Duchamp. I mean, is this seriously anything other than keeping a lot of upper middle class people in the lifestyle to which they've become accustomed? Is it actually genuinely having any real tangible effect on the ground in the nations in which it's supposed to be helping people? Of course not. And I think that's one thing where you end up having a very kind of phony discussion over something like this, which is, of course, there's going to be concerns raised about how quickly this was done, the legitimacy with which it was done, because you've got an unelected Elon Musk just kind of like running rampant in various sections of the American state at the moment.
Yeah.
Also, in this kind of shock and awe way in which he and Trump seems to operate, a lot of good causes getting caught in the crossfire, even as some people might agree with the general drift of what they're doing. There's a certain way to go about it, certainly. But what has definitely been unveiled by all of this is just the sort of activist blob which has been maintained under the banner of charity and aid, which really wasn't helping anyone other than the people working within it, to be perfectly crude. Even if they did do some good works, the idea that they have had a transformative impact in the countries in which they operate is obviously nonsense. And if we're talking about Stonewall in this country, I mean, it's been at the forefront of shredding women's rights and clamping down on and pushing for, in effect, the kind of clamp down on free speech in the workplace and elsewhere. So the idea that that's something that the US taxpayer or anyone, frankly, should be supporting, the mind boggles all of that.
I mean, we should point out that, the UK has done very well to resist this kind of campaigning. I mean, we've got the moniker TERF Island, which I think is brilliant. We managed to take it on, just, I guess, really, these grassroots campaigns of brave, gender-critical feminists managed to take on this sort of quite mighty ideological assault on our way of life.
Yes, it's fascinating. And some of it started in Mumsnet forums, which Mumsnet is incredible. I mean, it's like the most real talk you will ever encounter. If you've had a child and there's all this rosy stuff about what being a parent is, And then you type your real thoughts into Google and Mumsnet comes up. And it's absolutely amazing. It's like authentic thoughts. And that's where a lot of it started. And people were just sort of, sharing their ideas and thinking, you know what, I don't believe a lot of this stuff. And then it grew, and the discussion, it was completely organic. That's the thing. So the sort of gender critical discussion versus what Stonewall was doing, this false debate versus how people really felt about things, their real lives, what these things really represented to people, and also kind of gave birth to what I think a new sort of down-to-earth feminism as well, rather than that sort of austere, abstract feminism that you have with like Judith Butler, who pioneered gender ideology, which doesn't matter to people in their real lives. And what I love is that this just grew and grew and grew, and so many people came together from different ends of the political spectrum and really managed to oppose what was a very well-funded movement, just using the power of their speech, which is incredible.
Yeah. I mean, it's ironic as well, because often the sort of TERFs in the UK would be accused of working or being funded by the American religious right. And now we know who was getting the American money all along. This episode is brought to you by Incogni, the simple way to take back control of your data. Recently, I noticed that I was getting loads and loads of spam emails and telephone calls, and every time I signed up to a new newsletter or something like that, it would just get worse and worse and worse. That's because businesses called data brokers were essentially selling my personal details on, including my address, my name, even my browsing habits. That's all stopped now with Incogni. It works behind the scenes to find out which data brokers have my information and sends removal requests on my behalf. If they don't cooperate, Incogni follows up until my data's taken down. It's a hands-off, hassle-free way to keep my private information totally private. And I've actually noticed the difference. Since signing up, I get way fewer spam calls and random marketing emails. It's nice knowing my personal details aren't just floating around for someone to buy. And the best part? Incogni doesn't just do a one-time cleanup. It keeps working in the background, regularly checking if new brokers have picked up my data. Trying to do this manually would take hours of research and endless emails to dozens of companies. But with Incogni, you just sign up and let them handle the rest. Plus, you'll get regular updates so you can see the progress for yourself. If you want to keep your loved ones safe too, Incogni's plan lets you add up to 4 others for the same protection. And with a 30-day trial and a full money-back guarantee, you can try it risk-free. Take back your privacy today. Go to incogni.com/spiked and get 60% off an annual plan. That's incogni.com/spiked, or click the link in the description. 2 police officers from Greater Manchester Police showed up at the house of a grandmother. They acknowledged that she hadn't committed a crime, but they did say, "Someone has told us about your social media posts." Essentially, this woman, Helen Jones, had been complaining about her local Labour councillor after he was exposed for being a part of that WhatsApp group that led to the sacking of Andrew Gwynn.
Trigger Me Timbers.
Trigger Me Timbers, where they would
Always should be
basically
named.
insult various Labour figures. Their local councillor, Councillor Sedgwick, was also part of this group. And Helen Jones basically says, "Not looking good for Councillor Sedgwick," and says, "I hope he resigns, but I don't think his ego will let him." That results in a knock on the door from the police. Tom, obviously, there's no threat to free speech in Britain, and this is all a lie made up by right-wingers. But what do you make of this?
No, exactly. Just because you can't go on the internet and criticise your own elected representatives without being visited by the armed wing of the state, the idea that there's a free speech crisis in this country is absolute moral panic and nonsense. I mean, it is one of those things where there have been these really irritating kind of deflections from Greater Manchester Police. They said in this particular case that we are duty-bound to inform someone that they have been the subject of a complaint for harassment. I defer to the rule book on this particular case, but I refuse to believe that that can be standard operating procedure for almost any crime. I mean, the police are going to have to deal with obviously spurious complaints constantly. And as soon as they would have been presented with the supposedly offending comments, they would have realised that this was a waste of their own time. It's worth saying that, at least according to the Mail on Sunday reporting about this, Helen Jones has intimated that she believes it was the councillor, or at least people around himself, who actually made this particular complaint. So with that, you would have thought the police would have treated it with even higher dose of scepticism than they otherwise would. And it's also important to say that just because no further action is being taken in this case doesn't mean that it's not a free speech problem. I mean, people are naturally going to be more fearful of expressing themselves on the internet if they worry that the police are going to show up as a consequence. I think the real story here is that the police have got it into their heads that policing speech, refereeing online discussions to a almost farcical degree sometimes is the bread and butter of their job. They've embraced this with gusto. I think there's a particular fear amongst some of them that if they're not seen to be serious enough about certain cases, depending on the victims, whether it's elected politicians who sometimes claim to be much more under the cosh than they actually are, or whether it's particular activists and identity groups who claim to be the target of all of this harassment when it's often just, people accurately gendering them on the internet or wherever it might be, that they happily play this role. I think the problem is that you basically get into a situation where the police become like the hired goons of the easily offended, and they will happily show up and, in effect, if not in intention, intimidate people because they've criticised someone else online. It's one of those, like so many of these stories about the police and free speech in this country. It's both kind of farcical and sinister at the same time. And I don't know why they don't just cut it out, because so much of this is them choosing to do this rather than it being mandated by law or government or what have you.
I've been surprised at how quick some of the sort of liberal voices have been to defend this police action. Normally they just ignore stories like this, but people like Emily Maitlis have been tweeting about it. She tweeted a tweet saying what you said, Tom, that the police somehow have a mandatory duty to inform people that a complaint has been made against them, which, if you think about it for 2 seconds, would scupper just about every police investigation if you had to be told immediately that the police are onto you. Otto English on X has been saying it's fine because the pensioner in question is younger than Kylie Minogue. I'm not really sure what the relevance of that is, so why are people what's all the big fuss? But anyway, Candice, what do you make of it?
Yeah, I agree with you. Why are people so oddly defensive about it? I wonder if it's because the debate on social media is sometimes people from other countries saying, what's going on in the UK? And sort of this sort of like weird, distorted patriotism comes up, and people just want to defend it because they don't like seeing themselves the way other people see them. It's obviously a real problem. I mean, I completely question the legitimacy of these non-crime hate incidents. They were never debated in Parliament. They came from a quango. They seem to be highly controversial because whenever they're reported in the media, whenever a story about one of them hits the media, people are really angry about it. And when you see what some of the logs have been, what some of the things recorded as non-crime hate incidents have been, it's like you say, it's sinister, but it's also farcical. I think a school child was logged for saying someone smelled like fish. I mean, that's ridiculous.
There have been thousands of cases of school children logged for non-crime hate incidents.
Jeez. I mean, if I go back to my school days, I think it would have just been one long non-crime hate incident. It's like the police also, they don't use any judgment. They don't use any humour. I mean, you would think if someone called you up saying that once, like the petty council politics, like petty council politics, you'd have a good laugh and put the phone down. But they don't. It's the sense of entitlement they feel, the sense of entitlement that they can police speech. And of course, the practical consideration of it is it's taking them away from what people see as the real remit of the police, to solve crime.
Yeah, which obviously everyone is aware that is not happening. Most burglaries won't be solved. Most shoplifting is basically decriminalised. But if you say something a bit rude about your local councillor, you're in deep trouble.
And that's the chilling thing about this, is that they do it partly because they've been captured, like we've been talking about. They really go above and beyond what even the law requires. Non-crime hate incidents, as you say, Candice, was something that was kind of cooked up within the kind of policing quangos and then applied with gusto by various different police forces. The strange kind of hate speech related campaigns that they've run over the years, in Merseyside a few years ago, where they showed up outside Asda with a big billboard saying being offensive is an offence. Later had to clarify that literally that isn't quite the case, but nevertheless they were happy to do that. They did that entirely of their own volition. I think it was South Yorkshire Police ran a Hate Hurts campaign, which was effectively encouraging people to come forward, just with things that had upset them, I suppose. They've really attached themselves to this. And on the one hand, there is this post-McPherson desire to repair, as they see it, their relationships with various minority communities, as if, say, ethnic minorities are more concerned about people saying mean things on the internet than, things being stolen or their communities going to rot because there's no police about to protect them. But also, I think, because it's easy. Yeah. Because it involves someone sat at a computer looking at what someone else said about someone on an openly published social media platform. And so they feel like they can rack up some brownie points even if they're not catching any criminals. But public patience with this has run out, I think. They just need to drop it. Who am I to tell the police to do their job? But they should just do their job, I think.
Thank you so much for watching the Spiked podcast. We'll be back at the same time next week. In the meantime, why not subscribe to Spike's YouTube channel and then click the bell so you're always alerted whenever there's some new content. Spiked is producing more videos than ever, from podcasts like this one to interviews to our series of polemics. You really, really don't want to miss out on it. Plus, to get your daily dose of Spiked, just go to spiked-online.com. That's our website at spiked-online.com.